Welcome to Get Even. Get Even is the podcast where Even founders Ellen and Nora, that's me, sit down with incredible women who've been there, done that in the world of business. Get Even is your backstage pass to their lived experience. You'll hear raw insights, personal stories, and the realities of success. Whether you're looking for inspiration, practical advice, or a peek behind the curtain of what it really takes to thrive, this podcast is for women ready to go further. It's time to get even. Hi, I'm Dr. Nora Kozlowski, and today's guest is someone I deeply admire. It's Moran Baillie. Moran is one of our brilliant Even coaches and a senior HR executive with over 25 years of experience across education, insurance, and tech. Moran has always been drawn to human behavior and the human experience at work. But what makes this episode so powerful is her candor about her own journey. As a young woman, Moran lacked confidence in herself, lacked clarity in her direction, and she lacked the courage to speak up. And that experience ultimately led her down the path of self-development and made empowering other women her mission and her passion. In this episode, Moran shares what she's learned about reclaiming your voice, what she's learned about how to show up with self-trust, and why she now wants to help other women rise alongside her. This episode is for you if you're a woman who feels like you're holding back and you want to lead with greater clarity, courage, and self-trust. And it's also for you if you're a leader who's focused on building women's career progression. And anyone balancing ambition, caregiving, and self-doubt, and looking for honest insight on how to rewrite old stories that no longer serve us, you'll get a lot out of this conversation. I hope you enjoy.
Nora, thank you for this beautiful introduction. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. But let me just jump right in with a question and ask about your journey, and especially with how you yourself, how you got to the point in your career and in your life where you were able to start freeing yourself from these old stories and these limiting beliefs. So how did that happen? What did it take?
Well, surprisingly or not, it took hitting rock bottom. I had the unfortunate gift of having many breakdowns all at once in my life. Career-wise, I had a long-standing career in human resources in one of the leading universities in Sydney, but I was using only a fraction of my potential, and I was feeling frustrated and somewhat depressed even, because I knew that there's more than what I see and what I experience, but I just couldn't work out myself how to move forward. So I went through a phase of blaming others, blaming external circumstances, blaming my own psychology, and worse off, blaming myself. And I remember the time I met with a leadership coach, and she kept telling me, Moran, stop giving your power away. And I didn't quite understand what she meant by that. I always thought of myself as, a strong, confident woman, and I wasn't giving my power away. But her question and invitation really made me start asking myself big questions. And through this self-inquiry, I gained the awareness of what was happening to me. And the biggest concept that I adopted through this process is the radical self-responsibility. I call it 100% radical self-responsibility, and understanding that I was the common denominator, that it was me who had the key to all of the answers, all the answers to the questions, the big questions of my life. And it was only then that I was able to start doing the work and looking into my own limiting beliefs and that inner glass ceiling that I talk a lot about. In the first place I worked a lot on was fostering a more connected relationship with myself. And that was the point where things started to shift for me in the external and in return. So the inner work was happening internally, But in return, what I saw happening is that structures around my life started to shift. And I did feel that I was getting closer to utilizing, I wouldn't say full potential, but utilizing more of my potential. And, in essence, it gave me my life back, this process.
Wow. It's so interesting just to hear the relationship between what happens on the inside and then what happens in the structures, and how what happens around you, how other people respond to you, what you're able to do. I'd love to hear from you around, you do a lot of work with other women and other professionals to help them go on similar journeys, but what advice do you give to other women that you work with on how they can identify their own limiting stories, their own limiting beliefs? And do you have a technique that you teach for challenging limiting beliefs?
Yeah, absolutely. Beforehand, I think what would be really useful is to unpack, what do I mean by all stories, right? Like, what is this inner barriers and the things that hold us back? There's a whole theory around it, but I think through experiences, through examples, will be a really good way to demonstrate what I mean by that. When I was starting to work through my own limiting beliefs, one of the biggest things that I discovered, not surprisingly, is that confidence was my biggest thing. One of my biggest stories, limiting beliefs, was feeling that I'm not good enough. It's even though I was projecting confidence, inside this pattern or this story that I'm not good enough was running so deep. And you would ask, well, how did it show up in your life? So I was others oriented, chronically self-sacrificing. I used to take responsibility for other people's happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment at home, and also within my teams. I used to feel that I had to do more than everyone else to get the same amount of success and recognition. Now, all of this wasn't conscious. It's not that I was aware of it. I didn't even understand what I was dealing with. It just felt like something was off. I used to overcommit and then run myself to the ground and then give up. When things got too difficult before I attained level of mastery, because at some point I was getting to the same sort of conclusion that I'm not good enough. So what's the point? Now, it's not really imposter syndrome. The moment that I talk about this, people say, "Oh yeah, it's like feeling like an imposter." And imposter syndrome is slightly different, right? Imposter syndrome is this experience that or feeling that we are fake or phony, despite genuine evidence that we are successful. This patterns, these old stories, are like an inner glass ceiling. This is why I really like using this term, because they are invisible. They are barriers that sit on the level of identity, and they profoundly influence our perception, and they play a key role in shaping our experience, influencing our expectations, behavior, choices, responses to challenges at work, and so on and so forth. I got so fascinated with the work of understanding limiting beliefs and inner barriers, and how we break through this. And I'll talk more about what are the steps to break through them. But one of the things that I have seen since I started doing this work, which is more than a decade now, is that when you shift things internally, the external response. So what happened once I started to look into my own I'm not good enough story and this lack of confidence, my life changed. I was able to connect with the old story and completely transform it. Now, it didn't make me a selfish person, but rather someone who is well connected to her strengths and the value that she brings, and is able to show up in authentic confidence. So to cut a long story short, at the time I was able to leave my job at the university because miraculously or not, I was offered my first executive role in the corporate world. And this opportunity, I know, I'm convinced, would have never come my way if I was still operating from the lens of I'm not good enough.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of richness in that, and I think a lot of concepts that deeply resonate. Like you talk about authentic confidence, you talk about your inner glass ceiling. I think there's a lot in those alone. But and I do want to understand how those concepts now, how they relate to the work that you now focus on on confidence, on influence, on income. But before we get there, can you just tell me a bit more about some of the processes that you've alluded to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and there is a process. It's not just, awareness, and self-awareness alone doesn't bring transformation. It brings awareness. And with awareness, what comes is the ability to look at the right place and practice or make transformation or take actions that are in the right place. So what we want is to create the most amount of transformation in the least amount of time. And for that, you really need to know what you basically trying to break through, because things will show up. What I mean by that is that triggers will show up differently. Depends on the area that you're working with, depends on the situation. So really, we want to start observing reoccurring patterns throughout our sort of behaviors, or when we get triggered, when we feel frustration, when something happens at work and we feel, oh, well, that's just not cool. We want to use that to uncover what it's really about, because, the thing is never about the thing. I don't know if you've heard this saying. A good friend of mine, Mary Butler, uses this all the time. But it does give us a clue where to look. So, for example, if your boss at work is, you feel that they completely disregard, you, and skip over you, and you get triggered by that, the trigger is feeling invisible and overlooked. But when we have that, the place to go is then to start challenging this and look at how do we model this situation, models invisibility towards ourselves, right? So the relationship we have with other people often serve as a mirror for what goes on inside. And that's what I really like about these inner barriers and patterns. We get a lot of clues from the outside. We just need to know what to do with it. So it's a process of 5 steps. The first step is really connecting to your vision. So where do you want to go? What are you creating? If it's in your sort of career area, is what career trajectory are you creating? Where are you heading? It's like the map, the North Star. And then the second step is identifying what's in your way. What is the barrier? What is the one thing, 2 things that is basically blocking your path? Then once we have identified the belief, is challenging it, right? And it's asking questions like, is it true? How do I know that it's true? What evidence do I have that this belief is true? It's the work of Katie Byron, if you've come across her. And once we identified the barrier and we have challenged that sort of outlook, we literally rewrite a new story. We basically throw some tools and questions. This is the arena of coaching, is asking the right questions, right? But we reframe the belief and create a new story. And these 4 steps are the prerequisite work that leads to the final step, which is taking inspired actions. Without this, no transformation can happen. So we can do, and you can see a lot of women that do a lot of work, self-reflection. They spend a lot of time with counselors and coaches, etc. And there's no sort of movement and progression. And the reason often is because the actions are not matching this realization, awareness, and new story. So that is the key. Action is more useful than therapy. When I heard this phrase, the first time, I thought, yes, that's exactly it.
So action is more useful than therapy.
Yeah. So you can stay on the therapist's couch for years, but if you don't take actions, not a lot will change.
Okay. And so let's talk about outcomes for a minute, because you, as I mentioned before, you do focus on helping professionals with their confidence, their influence, and their income. And often these are outcomes, or I guess one would be an input towards one of the other ones being an output or an outcome. But what is it about those 3 things that matters, and how do these 3 things connect?
Yeah. So where it came from is from work that I've been doing with clients. So most of my coaching and mentoring clients struggle with one of these 3, or sometimes all 3 at the same time, because confidence, influence, and income are deeply interconnected. And when we progress or transform or elevate through one of them, so confidence and influence, we often see a natural improvement of the third one, which is income or earning capacity. When you think about it, confidence is the foundation, right? It's what empowers us to take risks, to assert ourselves, to speak with confidence, to show up, to put our hand up for promotions, to negotiate, etc. Influence is our ability to impact and inspire other people, which often comes from a place of authentic confidence, right? And for my clients, enhancing the confidence and influence often has led to significant improvement in their financial well-being. They become more capable negotiators, they're more visible in their own organizations, and they're more likely to seek out and secure advancement opportunities, which then leads to, better financial rewards, I guess. So I see the connection between the three, and I also see a nice flow. I'll give you an example. But not that long ago, a client came to me wanting to increase her earning capacity. Within the first session, it was evident that the problem was her ability to take up space, to articulate the value she was bringing to the organization, and to basically what it is to rise to that identity that she was building. Right, so she knew where she was going. She knew her career path. What she was missing is this courage to take steps that are in alignment with the leader that she is. It's almost like we kind of want to bridge this gap between who we are right now and the identity that we are creating. And that's the work that we did, so the coaching was around how not to make yourself small at the first sight of conflict.
Sorry, do you mean that in a physical? Is that like making yourself small? Is that a physical concept, or do you mean that is it more in like how you behave or how you talk?
Yeah, it's more a metaphor, so making yourself small is basically shrinking. If you're in a situation where you get feedback and it's quite negative from, let's say, the board, and the tendency is to basically something gets activated, and most women, put it this way, that I've been observing, we shut down if it's there's sort of the immediate response. So how do you work with yourself that on the spot you lean in, you understand what is happening internally, and you still show up, and you don't buy into that sort of inner critique in your head that tells you, oh my God, you messed up. And you still sort of work through this, and in the moment you can show up with more confidence. And other things that we do, that we as women, but not just, using minimizing language, or language that basically compromises our message. Some people apologize all the time, even when they have nothing to apologize for. It's a habit. How many times you start a sentence, oh, sorry, can I just ask a question? Rather than stopping and not apologizing. This is, if you have an important question to ask, there's no need to, and sorry in front of it. So anyway, to cut a long story short, when she woke up to how she was creating this experience, transforming the behavior was made possible. With no surprise, she's now a leader in her field in the organization, and having to break through other glass ceilings. Right? It's a never-ending work, I find.
But I think it's incredible then if you do that for yourself, if you're able to break through, and then if you're able to also do it within an organization, the ripple effect that has on others who are seeing you do it. And I think there's a lot of change that you can create, not just for yourself, but for people around you, in showing up differently.
Exactly. It gives her permission. When this is why I think it's so important to own the role of a role model. This is something that I do with my own children. They got to learn this from somewhere, and in the context of the workplace, we have to have more role models that give us permission to fail, to ask the wrong questions, to be in situations that are comfortable, to challenge our own assumptions, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly right. I think that's It's a nice lead on to broader systems or broader organizational context. And I love the story of the individual that you worked with. But I also think one of the things that I really like about talking to you, Moran, is the fact that you have been a HR executive for over a decade. And, you know, you've been in different environments, whether it's education, whether it's insurance, whether it's technology. And I'd love to, from your sort of vantage point, where you do have a bird's eye view over an organization and the dynamics within it, I'd love to know, how are you seeing issues of confidence, for example, play themselves out within an organization, and what are some of the impacts that you're seeing on women, especially in these contexts?
I love this question because I have been observing for more than 25 years people at work, not just women, but over my career, I had the opportunity to attend many executive meetings, to present awards, to run meetings with my own teams, attend salary negotiations, and so on in the context of human resources. And I started to notice how women show up in this scenario and take stock and take note of all the things that we do, the unspoken and spoken subtleties in the way that we show up, assert up, how women assert themselves, or how the mechanisms, how it happens, and how it impacts big things like pay gap, like career advancement opportunities, or general sense of empowerment in the workplace. And I discovered that I'm truly passionate about this topic, the topic of confidence and how we show up, and the outcome, how we compromise ourselves without even realizing it, and so on and so forth, to the point that I decided to write a white paper on this topic. The journey of women advancing in the workplace is a complex one. I think what made it easier for me is to segment the barriers that women face in the day-to-day to the right layers, right? So barriers exist on not just on one layer. There is the cultural layer, there's organizational layer, and then also there's the individual layer. And we all know that there are well-researched social barriers such as cultural norms, cultural expectations, gender roles, and so on and so forth. And there are also barriers on the organizational level, which, can profoundly impact women's ability to progress and advance their careers, right? The organizational level, your HR policies, your cultural, the organizational, the culture in the organization, how open management is to advancing women, and so on and so forth. But when I discover that the barriers that are at the individual levels are the one that needs to be broken first. Because imagine if you have a progressive organization that is all about women empowerment, and let's in a bubble, let's say that there's no gender pay gap and so on and so forth. You still have the individual, and if they suffer from things like self-doubt, lack of visibility, confidence issue, influence issues, etc., then the other layers are not going to help them much, right? So how these affect women, the barriers on the inner level, well, is what we mentioned, that might prevent them from being able to show up and for example, negotiate well their salaries, or they might be hesitant to apply for promotions. They might fail to assert themselves in meetings, right? Now, this not only affects a career progression, but also perpetuates the cycles of underrepresentation and the wage gap. I think everything feeds into each other. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that, yes, while society is working on helping, on making things even, and organizations go HR practitioners, that's their job, women also have some work to do on the individual level.
Yeah. So it's a shared problem, but we're having to play our part in tackling the problem.
Indeed.
I think one thing I would like to talk about is the difference, though, between, so confidence does not mean perfection. Confidence does not mean that you have to sort of have it all, and that there's never you can't have a down day, you can't have moments of doubt. And I do want to talk to you about how that can be damaging to women as well, to expect that we do show up as sort of perfect, or that we have it all and we do it, you know, throughout career, throughout parenting, we kind of smile through it all. And we, like you talked about earlier, you talk about self-sacrifice. I think it's quite important for us that, even especially that that we don't self-sacrifice, we don't just pretend it's all a breeze. And our philosophy at Even very much is that that veneer of perfection actually prevents women from embracing economic opportunity, because the pressure can actually be too much. And so for us, it's very important to be real about some of the challenges that that you do have when you're trying to combine career and caring, when you're trying to participate in paid economic activity. And I've certainly experienced some of the hard moments, some of the trade-offs, some of the moments of doubts myself. But for you, Moran, can I ask you about some of your trade-offs, your compromises, some of your moments around facing the juggle? So how do you look at those difficult moments? How do you make sense of them? How do you embrace them? How do you think of them?
Absolutely, Nora. Absolutely. I lived, like many others, I lived through this, exactly what you unpacked. And I'll give you an example. In one of my executive roles, one of the roles that I held, there were often times where I needed to meet, and I would, back then I didn't call it unrealistic expectations. I thought, oh, it's part of my job. For example, board meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? So back then, it was a few years ago now, I was freshly a single mother of young children with no support around me. You can probably hear from my accent, my family is not around me, so it's just me and my kids. And I had to be resourceful. So picture this, I had this presentation, I need to show up with my suit and, pretend that I didn't stay until 1 o'clock in the morning preparing for it, and also having to call up some friends who would do me a favor to drop my kids off at school, just so I can show up in the boardroom all ready to rock, to present, pretending that this is normal, right? Pretending that this is what I just had to do because I chose to have a career and I chose to be an executive. And wouldn't it be nice to have the acknowledgement? I'm not expecting to, to change, let's say, in this specific scenario, the board was overseas, so I get it. But what would have been really nice is to have the acknowledgement, to have the CEO stopping and saying, yeah, I know what it took for you to be here on time, all ready to rock. And I also aware of what you had to do outside of work to make this happen. So thank you. There was none of that. It was just expected. And we bought into it. I totally bought into it. I thought this is part of my job. And what I need to do to show up as an executive is to basically pretend that I have no challenges. The trade-off, I guess, here is I didn't challenge the concept, the notion of perfection. I just assumed that this is what I need to do. Another trade-off, which is really big, and I see it day in, day out, is the income trade-off, right? So many women I know, many women want to have a career, a meaningful career, but also want to be devoted mothers, right? Like, we want to be able to show up at school for the school head parade without being penalized for it. I found myself over in my career trading off full-time work and full-time income for part-time work, just so I can be there for my kids and witness their childhood, which also means that you have a whole sector of women, single mothers or mothers who not single, but they want to juggle career and kids, compromising on full-time work and therefore are economically disadvantaged. And I believe this even after today. You can see that if you are opting for part-time work, you will earn less, and it underscores the importance of support systems for families, not just women.
Wow, there's so much in that. And I was thinking as you were talking about the own moments that I've faced, where you show up early for a meeting and you feel like you've already had an entire day of I don't know, negotiation and stress behind you. And I think sometimes the simple act, actually, I think this is advice for organizations, the simple act of recognizing or saying, I see you, thank you for doing what you're doing. It doesn't make it that much easier, but it actually at least means that you feel somebody recognizes or sees the challenges that you're facing. But also, I think just what you're saying about part-time work, I think we could probably have a whole other conversation about unpacking part-time work and unpacking even what could full-time work look like if you tackled it more flexibly, or if you designed it more flexibly so that you could just pop out to watch the hat parade at school, just thinking about what are some of the assumptions that we have to challenge in organizations. And it's great that there are women like you in senior executive roles driving HR functions that are able to have some of these conversations, but it reminds me there's still a lot to be done. I do want to come back to career advice. I know that you're often in the position of mentoring others. You're often in the position of providing advice, whether that's in your HR role, whether that's as a coach, whether that's as a speaker. I do want to ask you about great career advice. So maybe let's start with what some of the best career advice that you've personally received.
There's one that stayed with me and served me actually quite well. And the advice was, if you believe you can, or if you believe you can't, you're right. Right. So we all tell ourselves stories about ourselves, what we can do, what we can't do, what we're good at, what we're not good at. I hear that a lot in the coaching situations where people say to me, oh, I'm just not good at blah, blah, blah. So the reason why I really like this advice is because it gives the power back to me. If I believe that I can, I'm right. And if I believe that I can, I'm also right. So if we are making stories about our limitations, the least we can do is make them useful. And this is something that I've practiced over and over in my career. And as to the worst advice that came as well, not once, there were many, but the one that I picked to share with your audience today is that we're supposed to live work at work and home at home. Right. So this called for a complete almost segregation between who we are at work and what we do at work. And we live that, we don't bring it home, and then we also don't bring home to the workplace. Now, there are elements of truth in this. I get that, absolutely. But what we don't want is to take this too far, right? Because what happens is, coming back to the story that I just shared, is when we basically put so much pressure on ourselves as women, especially, to be switched on all the time, even when we are struggling, or even when we have some challenges on the personal front. Ask any woman who is going through a challenging situation of any kind of loss or separation, or we name it, right? But when we think that we also need to be on and not show any emotions because emotions they don't have place in the workplace, I think it creates a situation where many senior women that have so much to give and so much to contribute choose to leave altogether.
It reminds me of the positive impact that you can have when you actually share the stuff that happens outside of work. And I'm just reminded by, you talked about, difficulties like thinking about loss, thinking about separation. I'm thinking about my co-founder, Ellen, how she went through a hysterectomy, and she shared that with her team very openly. And what that did in her previous role, what that did for her team in order to then be able to open up to her and trust her as a person was actually was incredible to see the impact. But it's still, like you said, quite often we're encouraged to sort of just shove everything under the carpet, pretend it's not happening. But I think it actually does us a disservice. I think both in terms of how you show up as a leader and how people are able to relate to you, but also what it does for those who come after us. And I think it creates more pressure for them rather than a kind of supportive environment or a welcoming environment.
Absolutely. It's exactly it. Yeah.
So we're almost coming to the end of our conversation. I've really enjoyed it, but can I ask you, you've been a phenomenal advocate for Even in our journey so far, Moran. Why is it important, in your own words, for women to have access to a platform like Even?
Apart from the fact that you and Ellen are role models, and pioneers. If we, identifying that there is a problem and taking actions to to improve things. So apart from that, I strongly believe that we can't become fully ourselves by ourselves. We need other people to reflect back to us our brilliance. And it's true, especially for women. I see it a lot in my coaching work. When you ask someone to tell you about what they're good at, it's very difficult for them to connect to their own brilliance and gifts, which is quite interesting. But it is our responsibility to put structures around us that support where we want to go to, right? What we are creating, and being part of a community that the whole purpose is to support and amplify one another is almost beyond the one of the few things that we can do. The notion that no one is coming to discover us or to give us the next leadership role, or no one is coming to do the work for us. So the concept that no one is coming to discover us or to give us the next leadership role where we can impact and influence positively other people is in the basis of what the benefit that I see that even can bring to the workplace, right? Platforms like even are essential because you guys are providing the structure and the support necessary for women to thrive, and the connections that tend to happen in communities like this, the ability of women to be amplified by others, that could make the difference. If someone is by your side, a friend, a colleague, someone from the even community, to navigate the unique challenges that we face on a day-to-day, that can make the biggest difference in helping women advance their career.
Thank you. I really love that concept and that phrase as well. And I know that you've in some of your speaking work, you've used this concept a bit as well, and it really resonates with audiences. So the concept that nobody's coming to sort of to save you, or to, like, nobody's going to sort of tell you, here you are, you're our next leader. You have to, and it comes back to the concept at the beginning, you have to take this radical self-responsibility. You have to stand up. You are the one who has to actually go on and do the hard thing, and you have to take up the space. I think it just is something that really deeply resonates with me. But can I ask you to just, because it's such an important concept, can you talk a bit more about that? The notion that nobody's coming to get you, nobody's coming to save you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to, because I see it every day. I see it every day in my HR work, but not only. When I speak to people, I get the sense sometimes, not from everyone, that they're kind of waiting for things to organize themselves for them. Like they're waiting for the next job opportunity, or they're waiting until their boss promotes them, or people who are unhappy at work, they're waiting for things to get so much worse before they actually take an action, right? I strongly believe that the day that I realize that no one is coming to create the work and the life that I want is the day that I feel that I liberated myself. Because if no one is coming, it's all on me. And if it's all on me, that now gives me my power back. So if I want to, and this is why I go back to why it's so important to have a North Star, why it's really important to have a vision in work and in life, right? But without that, it's very hard to know where we're going. But once we do, understanding that it's up to us, I find liberation in that. I find this is where my personal power thrives. If I know there's no one coming, it's all up to me. That's when I go, okay, well, what can I do to help myself get from point A to point B?
It's such a powerful message. And I think it's a beautiful one for us to finish on. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your experiences of how you've helped other professionals and other women, Moran. It's been an honor to have you on Even. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Ellen, as well. And well done, the both of you, for creating Even. I'm so honored and proud to be part of it.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm Dr. Nora Kozlowski, co-founder of Even, where our mission is to accelerate women's economic potential. Check out even-careers.com to learn how we support women and business to get even.